And he said, oh, and he finished the dream for me. All I did was tell him I had a terrible dream, something like that. Very vague, very general. He told me what I was wearing, where I was on the side of the road, that I'd been up all night, upset, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, how did you know that? I thought, I mean, I never thought of George as being psychic, I mean, mind reading. No, it's not something that, as I viewed him as a mind reader. And he said, because I was there, I found you. I said, what are you talking about? You found me. He said, yeah, 2,000 years ago, I found you. I was the one, I found you. I was the first person who found you on the side of the road.
I'm here today with Kelvin Chen. Kelvin is an author, meditation teacher, and life after life expert. His first book, Overcoming the Fear of Death Through Each of the Four Main Belief Systems, is a bestseller. His second book, Marcus Aurelius Updated, I may have pronounced that incorrectly, 21st Century Meditations on Living Life, is a collection of 67 essays ranging from emotions, life principles, meditation, and the spiritual. His third book, After the Afterlife, Memories of My Past Lives, describes in detail how his past life memories that reach back 6,000 years have resurfaced over the past 45 years and what they have taught him about himself and how our minds continue from lifetime to lifetime. Calvin, I'm really excited to have you here as my guest today. Thank you for coming on.
Great to be here, Tia. Great to be here.
You've had an amazing experience remembering your past lives. If you don't mind, can we go ahead and start there?
Sure. First of all, people should understand about my background that I've had no training, no past life regressions, no workshops about past lives. In fact, I did not believe in reincarnation or past lives or afterlife or anything. I come from a more science-minded uh, background and thinking. So when this started happening to me in 1977, when the first time I had any inkling of a past life memory, which I didn't even realize was a past life memory, we can get into that. Um, I kind of discarded it as just a weird experience. Um, yeah, so that's my background. So I come as a skeptic to this back in the 70s, 1970s, and it just caught me completely by surprise. Let's just say it that way, right? Yeah, wasn't looking for it, didn't believe in it, thought I was imagining.
And what did you believe? You said you didn't even realize that it was a past life memory. So what did you think it was? And then how did you realize it was a past life?
Yeah, yeah, good question. So first of all, I grew up in a suburb of Boston. Parents were science oriented. So I grew up in a kind of a science thinking household, right? Mom studied chemistry. She was a chemistry major, which blows my mind. I almost flunked out of chemistry in college. Anyway, uh, and my father was an engineer. So very science oriented thinking, etc. I mean, I went to church, but I really didn't believe in a lot of the stuff that was being told. I thought there was a lot of stories. I grew up, went to a Protestant church in Norwood, Massachusetts. Um, the experience that I had in 1977, the first experience that I had that I did not know was related to anything past life at the time, was a dream. I had a really intense dream. So, I mean, a lot of people have had intense dreams, and in this case, it was kind of a nightmare emotionally. But it was a very, very clear experience. It wasn't one of those kind of distorted dreams that you can have where cars can change into horses and stuff. Weird stuff can happen like that in dreams. And I've continued to have dreams like that sometimes too. But this dream was different. It was real life. I was there. I was in the dream. I remembered all the details of what I was wearing, the rock, the sand in my mouth, the dirt in my mouth, the feel of that was very sensory and very clear dream. And it was what some of your listeners may understand to be a lucid dream. I was very, very clear, colors, everything. And I don't think I had dreamt in colors before that dream and so forth. So it was an unusual experience, but I just thought it was a bad dream. That's what I thought. So I chalked it up for bad dream category, which I'm sure everybody's had bad dreams in their lives. And about 6 or 8 months later, I was on a meditation retreat for 2 months, 2 months every day, meditating all day in Switzerland. So I had already learned to meditate through Maharishi's organization, the Transcendental Meditation Organization, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's organization, in 1970, 7 years before this experience, this dream happened. And so I had already become a TM teacher. I taught probably 1,000 people TM before I was 30 years old. So I was already experienced with meditation, but never with anything like this. I was with his organization for about 10 years, and they went off in a lot of different directions. And I said, I left, and I wanted to stay focused on meditation. But at the time, I was still with his organization. I was on a 2-month retreat, meditation retreat, we'll call it, in residence, in a hotel that the organization rented in Switzerland. And so I was there with about 75 people, 75 guys. It was segregated, male, female, and so forth, different hotels. And so 75 of us guys in the hotel, and we would have this group meditation twice a day, I think twice a day, at least twice a day. We'd do a group meditation, and then we'd be meditating in our rooms alone, okay? That was the general program. In the group meditations with 75 of us sitting on this basically foam mattresses, wall-to-wall foam mattresses on the dining room floor. You can kind of picture that, the furniture all taken away and so forth. We'd sit there and we were doing some energy movement exercises in addition to the meditation. During one of those sessions, I flipped over on my back and I started experience, and it was completely spontaneous, involuntary. My energy just pushed me over my back. I was lying on my back on the foam. My arms were out like this, and my feet were over there behind my head. And I felt like I was being crucified upside down. And so I was having this experience every time we did a group meditation. And it went on for months and even some years after that. But it went on every time during this 2-month course. And it was going on for about 2 or 3 weeks. When I went for a walk with my buddy, George Hammond, we all buddied up with each other to kind of paired up to keep an eye on each other, make sure everybody was showing up at meetings and that kind of thing. And so we were out for a walk after lunch, after this had been happening to me for 2 or 3 weeks. And he said, and I started to tell him about the dream that I had. I don't know why, but now I know why. But I started to tell him about this terrible dream that I'd had about 6 or 8 months earlier. And he said, oh, and he finished the dream for me. All I did was tell him I had a terrible dream, something like that. Very vague, very general. He told me what I was wearing, where I was on the side of the road, that I'd been up all night, upset, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, how did you know that? I'd never thought of George as being psychic, mind reading. No, it's not something that, as I viewed him as a mind reader. And he said, because I was there, I found you. I said, what are you talking about? You found me. He said, yeah, 2,000 years ago, I found you. I was the one, I found you. I was the first person who found you on the side of the road. So that's how that started opening up to me. But even then I was doubting. For years, I doubted. And then more stuff started happening after that. I started relaxing into when he said that. I thought, okay, maybe. And just the maybe relaxation level opened me up. And I started having memories of being a slave, in a Carthaginian slave. It took me a while to figure out it was a Carthaginian slave. At first, I just knew I was a slave and that I almost died on a piece of wreckage on a big body of water. It took me a while to figure out it was the Mediterranean. It took me a while to figure out it was 2,300 years ago. So, but all of these little puzzle pieces started coming together over years and years and years. They came in pieces over many years. That's the thing, you know. I didn't. You know what it's like? It's like I came up with this analogy, and I think other people have used this analogy. But I didn't realize that it was already out there. But I think of it like a jigsaw puzzle, and I think it's a great analogy that people sometimes use. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. Like each lifetime. Now I've had like 24 lifetimes open up to me that reach back, as you said, about 6,000 years. Each lifetime is like a jigsaw puzzle with no box cover. Like you don't know what it's supposed to look like. If you ever done a jigsaw puzzle, right? At least you know what it's going to look like. Oh, that piece, oh, it's going to end up looking like this. This, for me anyway, with this past life memory stuff surfacing, with no help from anybody external to me, just all internal to me spontaneously. It's like a jigsaw puzzle with no box cover. And you don't know sometimes, does this piece go with that puzzle or does that go with this puzzle?
Mm.
Because I started having as many as 6 or 8 different puzzles going on at the same time, different lifetimes, pieces of different ones over years. And sometimes over like a 20-year period, I would get another piece, major, like 8 or 10 pieces that fit together from one lifetime of like, let's just say one lifetime with 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 puzzle pieces, that I get 10 or 20 or 50 pieces that come together. It sounds like a lot, but out of 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 or 100,000,000 or 100,000,000,000, it's not that much. But it gives me a piece of my life that I can wrap my mind around and learn more about myself, which I think is what the value is.
I
Uh,
love that analogy. Yeah. So are each lifetime it's its own puzzle, and then are the lifetimes as a puzzle also puzzle pieces to the overall bigger picture?
well, yeah, it's the overall bigger picture of who I am, of
Yeah.
what makes me up, because I think there's basically 2 things. I mean, I try to distill it down. I mean, I'm sure there's a gajillion things, but 2 basic things that um, are kind of our drivers. They're kind of the sources of how we define ourselves as a being. And I'm not talking about soul. That's a whole separate, different discussion. I'm talking about something that we can specifically point to, that's less abstract. And one is, I think, our personality traits, and the other is our experiences over the millennia, or like the multiple millennia, probably, that we accrue and develop and learn from about life and people and the universe and the world we live in and how to navigate it and all that stuff. I think those are kind of the 2 basics. There's certain personality traits, and it's hard to say which comes first, the chicken and the egg, and which one's influencing the other. It really doesn't matter to me, because it's clear to me that I've had personality traits, which we can talk about, that have traversed over the millennia for thousands and thousands of years, similar personality traits that make up Kelvin Chen. Now, I wasn't Kelvin Chen 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago or 250 years ago, but it's making up this thing, this being that in the 20th and 21st century calls himself Kelvin Chen. These personality traits are independent from that specificity of the naming and all that in the biological body. And then the other thing, as I said, is I think we learn from experiences, or we can learn. Some people don't. Some people, you look around and go, did you even really learn from? I mean, how many times do you have to bang your head against the wall before you stop banging your head against the wall? Some people are slow learners, let's just say, or maybe even never learners. But those of us who choose to learn, accrue this massive knowledge about ourselves and about the universe and how we navigate it and live life. It's called living life, right?
Does this help us to live better lives, to remember our past lives and the lessons that we learned, the mistakes that we made? Is the purpose of that to help us to live a better life in this life and then continue on improving ourselves?
Well, you say purpose. So what's purpose? So I make it, I make it the purpose of why I remember stuff. Somebody else they may not think of it as in that same way. They may just think of it as cocktail party talk that they want to impress people with. That's not my thing. I don't really care if people, it doesn't matter to me personally whether people believe what I say my memories are. What the reason I started talking, and I didn't talk about this stuff, by the way, started happening in 1977. I didn't start talking about it publicly until I think 2018, relatively recently. Was it 6 years ago? And the reason is because I've been doing this overcoming the fear of death work for 35, 40 years. And it dovetailed into that to help people reduce their fears. That's why I started talking about it publicly. But because some of the memories that I have are of known people. And so people may think, well, yeah, no, no. But most of my memories are not of historically known people. And to me, I take it to your question, I take it to inform myself more about who I am. Not everybody would do that. Some people would just be blown away by one of their lifetimes that might be a known person and just run with that and just talk about that one lifetime, and that's it. That's what they do. To me, these are vehicles for teaching. That's the way I look, teaching myself. And then I'm a teacher. So one thing that I've been all my lifetimes is a teacher. Now, I haven't always been a full-time teacher, whether it's spiritual or otherwise, but teaching has always been a part of my personality. Even this lifetime, when I was a lawyer, I was involved in helping run law firms this lifetime, but teaching other lawyers about how to practice better. So there's an aspect of teaching, even though I was a lawyer, I wasn't a teacher, I wasn't a professor, With other lifetimes, same thing. I may have been a military leader in another lifetime, but I always viewed my role to make my soldiers better at doing whatever their job was in order to survive, in order to live, in order to win the battles and the wars that we were in thousands of years ago. So there's a teaching aspect to me that runs throughout, regardless of whether or not I've been a quote unquote teacher in the way somebody may label me in terms of a role in society. There's always been a teaching aspect. So I learned that about myself. And what does that do? It informs me in the present to relax about that aspect of me, not try to make it a job like, oh, I got to be a high school teacher. Oh, I got to be a professor in a university. But I can express that teaching trait, we'll call it, personality trait that I've had for millennia now in different ways. And so it's informed me how to live my life in the present better and lean into my personality traits that are helpful. And the stuff that's not helpful, you kind of alluded, implied, which you're right, you can learn from your mistakes and lean away from the personality traits like my stubbornness, which is a personality trait that I have, to kind of catch myself when I'm being that way, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to go back for just 1 minute. I want to talk about your work around fear of death, but I want to go back for a
Yeah,
minute first to your friend who said he saw you, he was with you 2000 years ago. He picked you up on the side of the road.
yeah.
To me, that is just absolutely fascinating, and that he would remember that as well. Is that someone you've been with on a journey for eons?
It turns out yes, but I didn't realize it obviously, before that, and even it's come out and become clear to me. Yes, so that happened in 1977, and I kind of researched in my own memory, my current memory, when certain things happened. So this is the book we're talking about now, where I get into all these details, the After the Afterlife book. Um, and in this book, I do get into like, when did this thing happen? And so the following thing I'm going to tell you, experience, again, you'd have to refer to the book because I can't remember exactly when I figured it out, but it was, let's say, sometime, I don't know, 20 years ago or 25 years ago or something like that. I had this um, knowingness that, and sometimes I'll blurt things out, like in the shower or something. I just get this bump in like when I'm in a kind of relaxed state, in other words, sometimes in meditation or after meditation or whatever, in a relaxed state, I'll just kind of blurt stuff out. And I blurted this out that Joseph was a friend of mine. And I kept repeating that for weeks, just in random relaxed moments, I would just call it, not while I'm focusing driving the car, but you know what I mean? A random relaxed moment. I would just blurt, like Joseph was a friend of mine. And I mentioned it to George once, and this was 25, 30 years ago, whenever. And he said, "Oh, you know who Joseph was?" And I said, "No." He said, "That's me." So he was Joseph 4,000 years ago, approximately, let's say. And when I was an Egyptian priest, because I remember being an Egyptian priest several times. I don't know which Egyptian priest or whatever, but I have all of these memories, and then being an Egyptian priest, etc. Um, which again, I describe the details in the book. But the point of your question is that I remember being his friend. We've been friends for a long time, right? And we were brothers 2,000 years ago, and we've crossed paths a number of times. Yes.
How did you meet him in this lifetime?
Oh, so this lifetime, it's a funny story. So um, I was 20 years old and he was 18, and he was a freshman at Dartmouth College, and I was a junior, I think, at Dartmouth College. Yeah, I was 2 years ahead of him. And I was in my dorm room up on the second floor, and it's material to the story that I'm on the second floor. I'm on the second floor of the dorm on a Saturday when everybody else is at the Dartmouth whatever football game. I don't know who they were playing. And I went to some of the football games my freshman year, but by the time I'm a junior, I'm like, yeah, it's not into going to the football games anymore. So I was in my room studying French. That's material to one of my, or two of my past lives, actually. So I was a French major. So I was studying, up there studying, and I look out my window and I see this frisbee going up and down. I'm on the second floor. I see this frisbee going up and down. And just from looking at the angle of the frisbee, I could tell somebody's throwing the frisbee to himself. And so I look at sort of George is out there throwing the frisbee to himself. That's how we met. And I said, "Hey, dude, you want somebody to throw the frisbee to?" And so that's how we met.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
yeah.
What a way to meet. I mean, to be the only two people around and he's throwing a frisbee to himself. So it's
Yeah, yeah. Everybody else, it was like everybody in our part of the campus. There was nobody around. Everybody's at the football game, and you could hear the football. People cheering. Down the, like 4 blocks down, 6 blocks down the street, whatever. But it was like silent where we are, and nobody's in the dorm. Everybody's in the football game. And turns out he lived up on the third floor. He was a freshman, and I lived on the second floor.
how did he discover, when did he discover that you were connected in a deeper way?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good question. It's a very astute question, actually. So he already knew about our lifetime together, but he didn't tell me. He didn't want to tell me. He wanted to see if I started uncovering something myself without any influence or whatever from him for about 2 years before my experience. So he started resurfacing some of his past life memories a couple of years before I did. And so before that, so he also taught TM, actually, back to how we met thing. So that's a true story about the frisbee thing. But his version of the story is slightly different. His version of the story is he met Kelvin Chen when Kelvin Chen, 2 or 3 weeks earlier, or a month earlier or something, introduced the TM teacher who gave George's TM lecture at Dartmouth College. So, I'm standing in front of 20, 30, 40, 50 people. I don't remember everybody in the audience, but that's when he, quote unquote, first knew who I was, right? So fast forward to 1975, so 74, 75, we were teaching meditation, TM, in Hong Kong. We were both moved to Hong Kong. I had already been to Hong Kong. Maharishi called me up when I got out of graduate school. Maharishi, very psychic. He always knew where I was, and he called me at a phone, somebody else's phone, where I was walking by at the moment that he called, when a receptionist should have been answering the phone. And I picked the phone up, and it was him looking for me. He was in Switzerland, and I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts at the time. I went and I became the first national leader of the TM organization in Hong Kong. And I coordinated 8 countries when I was 22, 23 years old. So George came over after I was already there. We were teaching meditation. He started having past life memories when we were there, living at the TM Center in Hong Kong. And we always used to make fun of him. We always, the rest of us, the TM teachers, we were like, yeah, George is in there. Who the heck knows what he's doing? He's in there. He says he's writing stuff down. He's like memory stuff. That's how that happened. So yeah, a couple of years before I did.
Why do you think this is happening to you?
Oh, I don't know. The short answer is I don't know. I'll give you some conjectures that I have. I think that so there's several different ways you could look at this answer to your question. It's an interesting question. So I'll give you so one of my personality traits is pragmatist, practical. So I'm going to give you the 2 practical things first, and then I'm going to conjecture on something else. Okay. So the 2 obvious reasons why these memories pop up to me so spontaneously is 2 things. I don't have a fear of death, and I'm not embarrassed about stupid stuff that I've done, or bad stuff that I've done, maybe even stuff that I'm not proud of. Okay, right? My sense of secure inner confidence and sense of self, that security inside myself, is established enough so that I don't care what other people think. If I talk about this stuff now, I probably did more decades ago, but it's like right? And I haven't had a fear of death for millennia, thousands of years. So I think those 2 things, I think those are 2 big barriers to most people. They're afraid of something, and it could be death, it could be something else, or they're afraid of embarrassment. That's another fear, right? We could call that a fear. What are people going to think of me? They're going to think I'm crazy, whatever. I don't really care, because I use these not to impress people. I use these memories to inform me about myself. Now, here's the conjecture part. So those 2 things, I think that's pretty clear to me. But the conjecture part is, I think that another reason some of these memories have come up to me is to help other people with especially not exclusively, but especially those experiences they may have had that are traumatic experiences in their past, whether they realize or remember that it's a past life memory of theirs or not. Because I've had some traumatic experiences. Dying as a slave, almost dying as a slave. I didn't die. Being crucified upside down. When in the 1800s, I was a leader of the Lakota, and I still get emotional about that, about not being able to prevent the genocide. It was literally, not figuratively, it was calculated government, US government genocide of Native people in North America, Canada, and the United States now, what we know as the United States. And so that trauma that anybody else may have experienced, and whether they have the memory or not, if they have memories of past lives, people will contact me and they find me and I help them work through it. And I share with them some of my memories and some of my experiences, if you know, on a one-to-one basis on the phone. I help people in 68 countries now. So I'm working on the phone, on Zoom and so forth, or on WhatsApp a lot, and helping people move forward in their lives, because I've figured out ways for myself to resolve the grief, to recover from the grief that many of these traumatic experiences, how they've affected me, right? So that I've been able to move forward. So yeah.
So the bigger picture is that you were given, I think we can call this a gift, of your past life memories so that you could help others and yourself.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know if it's a gift given to me, or I think there's influences on the other side that can influence an opening up of memories. So you could call that a gift, I suppose. But it's a gift that I've given to myself too, because I've opened up so many different channels of my own personality to myself that have released me. So it's two things. They've released me from the binding influence of the past experience that may have been a negative, we'll just call it a negative, or experience, a limiting experience. And in the other hand, so release, and then what does that give rise to? Freedom to express more of myself, um, with less contraction and more expansion, right? That's what, to me, that's like another way of articulating happiness in life, right?
Mm, yeah. And so in your work helping others, you work to help people overcome their fear of death. Tell me about that and how that you got involved. What interested you about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the history of that is the genesis, the inspiration for that was my mom, who died very young. So she was in her 50s. She died young, in her 50s. And the picture of health, like literally before she was diagnosed. I mean, she said she didn't have any symptoms. Nobody would know for sure, but she said she never had any symptoms. And she just tripped on our stairs in our house just a little bit, slipped down a couple of stairs. Nothing, didn't really hurt herself or anything, but she thought that was weird. She just thought that was weird. And that's what made her go to the doctor. And that's when they found thousands of tumors, thousands of tumors. And they just looked at her brain at that point. They didn't even do a whole scan at that point. This is 1981, 82. So this is kind of early on in chemotherapy and all this other stuff. It's very, very early on. They just, thousands of tumors in her brain alone. So they just didn't even bother to scan the rest of her body. So she was gone very, very quickly. That was very traumatic for me. I was very close to my mom. And I started talking to people about it, because I don't know, sometimes you just start talking to people about stuff, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just say, "Oh yeah, everything's okay." How you doing today, Cal? "Oh, everything's fine," even when it isn't. But for some reason, I was a third year of law school at the time, and I was walking down the hallway, and somebody asked me, I don't know, "How you doing?" Something, whatever, like that. And I just said, "Yeah, I'm okay." My mom just died though, and I just kind of made like a matter of fact comment. But then they just opened up, and and then just people just start opening up. You disclose a little bit, and then people start telling you their stuff. And that's how that happened. And so I started helping people, not realizing that I was helping myself. Well, soon I realized how much it helped me by talking to other people and helping them. So that's how I just back-ended into it. I didn't do it professionally. It was just helping people with death and dying stuff since the 1980s. Um, and then later I took some certification classes on grief and dying and so forth and so on. But so I've learned some stuff, but I learned on the street basically by talking to people. That's how I got into it. And I wrote my first book about almost 10 years ago now.
And that book is
Over 10,
Overcoming the
over
Fear
10.
of Death Through Each of the Four Main Belief Systems,
Yeah,
correct?
right. Yeah, and the four main belief systems, by the way, are not religious or cultural beliefs. They're the belief systems that um, that George and I figured out that are really you could talk about as really underlying the religious and cultural beliefs out there. You know, so because I wanted to talk about it in a way, I wanted to talk about overcoming the fear of death in a way that would help people across religions, across cultures, without telling them they had to change their beliefs. That's the point.
Were you raised in a religious household?
Uh, Not a religious household, but my parents made us go to Sunday school. So if that makes sense. I
Okay.
think they wanted a free babysitter at the First Congregational Church in Norwood, Massachusetts on Sundays. They made us go to church, to Sunday school, and they would go on like Easter, the high holidays. They would go Easter and Christmas. The parents would come to us and go to church because we didn't have Sunday school on those holidays, right? So they would come with us and so forth. But it wasn't a religious household. We never talked about religion in our household. It was a science household. Yeah. So to my father didn't believe in God or heaven or Jesus or anything. And I've had my own Jesus experiences since my past life memories opened up. But I never felt it never resonated with me, the stories told in the church, for the most part. Some of them did, but so not a religious household, no.
Were your philosophies or your beliefs that you had previous to remembering your past lives changed in any way once you started to realize you were much more than who you thought you were?
Yeah, absolutely. But they started changing even a little bit before that, because when I learned to meditate in 1970, when I was a teenager, um, that's when I think experientially I had a big shift, because now I'm starting to experience my mind and my body as separate entities, they're separate, distinct from each other, right? My mind is not my body. My body is not my mind. So I started having those experiences in meditation on a regular basis, meditating twice a day. Um, so that was a shift, but the past life stuff was like a totally different, you know, totally different shift in 1977. So yeah, changes my belief system. And then in 1986, I started spontaneously communicating with the beings on the other side, angels and dead loved ones and people who are dead, people who I did not know who are dead on the other side would come visit me and so forth. This started completely spontaneously in 1986. So I didn't, like I said, I went to church. I mean, they talked about heaven and this and that. And I thought, yeah, okay, whatever. I really didn't believe it. I thought there was just stories until I started having experiences myself. So it's kind of interesting. My past life memory started before my communications with the other side, and like heaven stuff. What people would call heaven. You know,
Tell me more about these communications. Were they guardian angels? Were they guides? Was it random people coming to you? Or
it was all everything you just said. It was everything you just said. But initially it started out. I was alone in my condo, uh, Cleveland Circle, for those listeners know where that is, in Boston, Massachusetts, and with my dog and my cat. So there were no other humans in the no other talking beings, no other human talking beings in the room at the time. And I started getting communications that I didn't know where they were from or what. I thought at first I thought I'm just making this stuff up. Again, it's that my science mind, right? I'm thinking, just making, imagining. It's like my mind is thinking about, weird stuff, and where's that coming? I just assumed it was that. But then it started happening so frequently, like every time I closed my eyes, it started happening. And so I started taping. This is 1986. I had these little boom boxes, with a tape deck, and you hit the button, whatever, and you start taping. And so I started saying what I was getting. And so I started taping the stuff. Then I started transcribing it on like, this was before computers, 1986. So I didn't have a computer, but they had these typewriters that had memory in them, a little memory chip of some sort. And so I had a Brother, I remember it was a Brother, that was the brand, Brother computer that had a little memory chip in it, and it would, type the stuff up. Anyway, I started getting more and more and more of this. This was going on. It went on for about a year and a half, almost every day. Well, every day, almost every time I closed my eyes. So it was happening every day, almost every time I closed my eyes, for about a year and a half, like this. And at first, it was beings like the first beings that came said they were archangels. So Archangel Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel. So it was mostly Archangel Michael. And I remember in my 900 square foot, whatever, little condo in this Victorian house, it feeling like there were thousands of beings crammed in. The energy, I couldn't see them, but the energy felt like it was crammed with the energy of as if thousands of beings on the other side every time he came to talk to me. So any of them, but it was mostly Michael. So it's probably like 80% Michael, and the others, 10 to 15%, 20% of the other three. And then it started all kinds of other angels. When I say angels, what I mean when I say angels, because sometimes people mean different things when they say angels. I mean, the way I use the word angels is beings who have not been incarnated in physical form at any point. Some people use the word angels more generally and loosely, like anybody who's on the other side is an angel, like your dead grandmother can be an angel. And I understand that, and you could use it that way too. It's not wrong. It's just a choice, a word choice. But so other angels were coming, and besides them, and then it was dead beings who were talking about their life here, and now they're on the other side, and so forth, and et cetera, et cetera. So it was like, I don't know if there were hundreds of different beings over that year and a half to 2 year period.
That's really fascinating. And so, do you still communicate with these beings on the other side?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So yes and no. This is what I mean. So it's interesting. Some of the beings who first came to me wanted me to kind of be a messenger for their message to people here. And I had no interest in being a psychic medium or whatever, but even though people could say I was having psychic medium-ish kind of experiences, I guess. But this was just spontaneously happening to me out of the blue, right? So I got asked basically to do that, and it wasn't what I wanted to do. It's not my thing. So what I do is I take information, I assimilate it, and I take what is useful for me, and I throw away the rest. And this is what I teach my students to do. But because filtration, I think, is important. Filtration, I think, is the key to self-development. If we don't filter and we just blindly follow what other beings, whether they be on the other side or this side, tell us, then we're not really owning the material, and we're not really developing ourselves. We're just a loudspeaker for somebody else's thoughts. So I already kind of knew how I was before this started happening. And so, and if it's psychic as they must have known that, but they were still giving it a shot. And so that's what I mean when I say yes and no. I'm not really communicating with those original ones so much anymore, but others since then, yes, who share my kind of universal view of how self-development really, I think, works, by this assimilation process, as opposed to just blindly following somebody and just, or a teacher just saying, thou shalt believe what I'm telling you, and just shut your own mind off. That is not me. All my students know that is not how Kelvin Chen teaches. So yes and no.
Well, I like that answer. And switching gears a little bit, just to go back to your past lives again, have
Yeah.
you found any validating evidence in historical figures to confirm your memories?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. And I get into many different corroborative examples in the book, but I'll give you a couple. So one time I was meditating with my daughter. My daughter is now 29 years old. When she was I think she was 12 or 13, 14 years old, something like that when this happened. Okay. So some years ago. And we were meditating together. And when I was writing the book last year, she reminded me about some of the details of this, because I remembered some of it, but I didn't remember all of it, because when you're in the middle of the experience, you're in the middle of the experience. But she was sitting next to me when we meditated. So she said, "Oh, Daddy, remember that happened? Um, and you started yelling Saracens. And in the, after you finish in your meditation, or after the meditation, I can't remember exactly when it happened, but when my eyes were closed, I started yelling Saracens, Saracens. And it was very emotional," she reminded me. And she said, this is the part I didn't remember. I remembered that part. What I didn't remember was that, so I always tell my students to rest after they meditate, not to just get up after you meditate, to always have a rest period of 5, 10, 15 minutes. There's no upper limit, but to rest afterwards so you have a transition to come out of your meditation. So this is the part that I did not remember until last year when I was writing the book, and she reminded me. She said, "Yeah, Daddy, and you were on the floor, and I looked at you. You were lying on the floor." So I was lying on the floor resting after my meditation. She said, "You were lying on the floor, going like this, going like this with two hands. And you said it was like a sword. You were holding a sword." And I was yelling Saracens. I did not know what that word meant in English. I didn't know if it was an English word, a foreign language word, or whatever. I didn't know it was a noun, a verb. I didn't know what it was. And so we looked it up on her computer afterwards. And it's the old word pre-1600s, before the 1600s. That's the word for Muslims. We call them Muslims now. Before 1600, they were called Saracens. I did not know that. But I was having a past life memory of a lifetime in the 1100s when I was leading the Third Crusades in battle. I was having that memory, whenever that was, 14 years ago, whenever it was, of the lifetime in the 1100s. That lifetime started opening up to me, I think, in 1978. Yeah, 1978 was the first time I had a glimpse of that lifetime in the 1100s. So that's an example. Another quick example is more recently in 2020, so just 4 years ago. And this story is also in the book, because this one, to be honest, surprised and shocked me, and I'm the experiencer. Okay, so 2020, 4 years ago, I meet this guy on Facebook. His name is William Baldridge. His nickname is Widge. We've now become friends over the last 4 years. But he finds me on Facebook. Why? He Facebook friends me. Why? Because he also used to be a TM teacher in the 1970s, like when I did. So there's some commonality there, and people will find me and they remember me from whenever. Some people remember me. He didn't remember me because we didn't know each other in the 1970s. He was in Santa Barbara and Los Angeles, California. I was on the East Coast in Boston and Cambridge and New Hampshire and New England teaching, Connecticut and so forth. I had no contact with people on the West Coast. He tells me, so then he hears about my past lives. He tells me a story about this guy on the West Coast who was talking about me, but not Kelvin Chen. He was talking about Kelvin Chen's past lifetimes before Kelvin, 4 years in 1973, but 4 years before I started having any memories myself. And he didn't just talk about one of my past lives, he talked about multiples of my past lives, all of which I later had memories of starting in 1977, 1978, and then didn't finish knowing who I was until 2014. This guy was talking about all of this in 1973 in a public lecture in Los Angeles that widgets, friends, and so forth would go down and hear this guy talk. This guy's name was Charlie Lutz. Anybody who knows anything about the TM organization has heard Charlie Lutz's name. I never heard Charlie Lutz speak. I never heard him. I was in the science arm of the TM organization because of my background and so forth. We talk about, right? So we were looking at scientific research. We were science oriented. We trying to teach in schools, businesses, professional athletes, and so forth. Charlie Lutz was in the spiritual arm. He talked about past lives and spaceships and aliens and all kinds of crazy stuff that we thought was nuts. I didn't know anything about that. William Baldridge told me this 4 years ago. How crazy is that?
That is very crazy. I've never heard of anything like that. Is he also like a member of your soul group that moves with you through your lifetimes?
William Baldridge is, yeah.
Uh,
And Charlie Lutz, turns out, now that I know more about his past lives, he and I did have an overlap, at least one that I'm aware of. Although I've never, he died 20 years ago. He's like 30 years older than I am. But so he died 25 years ago or something like that. But I never met him, never heard any of his talks, never read any of his talks, never had no contact with him in the 20th century, but had contact with him 2,000 years ago. Oh, I think a main thing as we wrap up together here is that people, if they have memories that start to open up, to feel free to reach out to me. Go to my website, kelvinchin.org, and send me go to contact page and send me an email, and I do a free initial consultation with anybody in the world about anything that I do. But you don't have to have past life memories to fully develop yourself either. Look at your emotional patterns. Those will reveal some of your personality traits, because the emotional patterns are our drivers. We knee-jerk. We default to our emotional patterns. They drive, before we even can think about stuff, the emotions are driving us, really. And they can inform us about what our personality traits are. And then you can kind of go in, as I alluded to earlier, and kind of pick out the stuff that doesn't really serve you so well, and pay attention to that stuff, and then lean into more of the stuff that is helpful, that drives you, that's really helpful to you and other people. That's this kind of summary takeaway. And then the other thing I'll just briefly mention is what I call these memories, where I call them recognition memories, where we may recognize something like music or certain clothing from a certain time period, or in my case was Egyptian mummies and medieval armor when I was 5, 6 years old, when my mom used to take us to the Museum of Fine Arts, used to take me to the Museum of Fine Arts when I was 5, 6 years old. And she let me go alone in 1956, alone in the museum. Nobody would do that today. They'd arrest you. But then it was like nobody in the museum, but a dozen of us on Saturday morning when they opened. Museums were not popular places to go to back then. So that's where I would go. Now I realize those are recognition memories of my Egyptian lifetimes and in my lifetime in the Middle Ages and the Crusades and so forth. So those things, I talk about that in my first book. Actually, I talk about that as the recognition memory idea in all three of my books. I talk about that and I give some specific examples. Jewelry, one of my friends, she's really into jewelry. I taught her how to retrace that back, and she figured out that the jewelry was from certain kind of jewelry, specific, was from the made in the first and second century. She figured out her past life from that by following what I call following the breadcrumbs, right? So those are kind of little tidbits and tips for people.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And I'll link your contact information as well as your books in the video description below. So if anyone wants to reach out or find your books, they can easily find those. And I want to thank you for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. You have amazing story to share with the world and amazing work that you're doing as well to help others. Thank you, Kelvin.
Thanks for having me, Tia. Take care. Hope it's been helpful for folks. Yeah.
Thank you for being here. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and supporting my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing if you enjoy near-death experiences and other spiritually transformative stories. It helps the algorithm know that this information is useful and push it out to more people. And that's the goal, to get as many people to know that we are eternal spiritual beings and that we never die. Our bodies might die, but our essence will never die. And I want people to live with less fear. Let's all spread the word. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that little notification bell so you get all the notifications when my videos post. Thank you for all of your support. I'm sending love to you.